All right, welcome in. It is week 7 in the NFL, and I just wanted to roll through and point out a couple of players that I think are going to be interesting this week for one reason or another. Also, point out a couple of strategies that I may be using. Again, this is week 7. This is a full slate that you're looking at here, so we can talk about guys all the way from Thursday through the Monday night game. So everyone is on this slate. So I'm just going to run through position by position here, kind of point out the most interesting players to me, and then happy to continue the conversation in the comments section or on Twitter at DFS On Demand. All right, cool. So basically, let's start with quarterbacks here. I think it's fairly straightforward this week. Really, no surprises here. I think the popular players, of course, going to be Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, all with good matchups and decent prices. Matt Ryan will likely be the chalk this week. I mean, this guy is playing at an MVP caliber level. Leading the Falcons to a great start. He's leads the league in passing yards. He's only thrown 3 interceptions. You can see he's scoring a ton of fantasy points. At least 26 fantasy points in 4 out of 6 games this year. One stat I do want to point out is that he has a 9.8 yards per attempt, which is 1.7 yards more than the guy in second place, who is Phillip Rivers. 1.7 separates Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers, and then 1.7 separates Phillip Rivers and Jameis Winston, who ranks 28th in the league. So Matt Ryan is literally lapping the field. He is better than the second place guy at the same rate that the second place guy is better than the 28th place guy. It's actually really incredible. I don't know if it's sustainable, but again, this week you've got Matt Ryan at home against the Chargers. He's going to be popular, but for good reason. Probably one of the better cash game plays of the week. If Matt Ryan is the chalk of the week, who of these guys is going to be a good pivot, maybe a good GPP play? I think Drew Brees, of course, again, a guy who has so much upside, but on the road is a little concerning. That's going to drive his ownership down. But I'm really looking at someone like Andrew Luck. If you look at the opponent position ranking, Tennessee checks in with the 6th fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. This number here is a really big indicator of ownership for the casual fan. They really just go through and they look for the green. They look for good matchups and avoid all the bad matchups. It's pretty incredible, really. Andrew Luck to me is a guy who's matchup proof. Can go out, throw 300 yards and 4 touchdowns on any given week. He started off the season really hot, had a great game against Detroit. Floundered around a little bit for 3 weeks, and then he's kind of bounced back in the last 2 to give you the points that you would expect from Andrew Luck. What's really interesting about him right now is he has been sacked more than anyone in the league. His offensive line is brutal, and they have him running for his life. What's interesting about that is it's forcing him to scramble and take more rushing attempts. You can see last week, 7 rushing attempts, 5 and 4 the 2 weeks before that. That is 16 rushing attempts in the last 3 weeks. Combine that with all of these passing attempts is a lot of opportunity for fantasy points. You have to remember, Andrew Luck is a very capable runner, and 40 rushing yards is the equivalent to 1 passing touchdown. So he can kind of save you, if he rushes for 40 yards and a touchdown, now that's an extra 10 points that he just tacked on just through his legs. And here's a guy who's probably going to throw 40 times. This game has one of the higher totals according to Vegas on the slate, and the Colts are, I believe, slight underdogs last time I checked. So expect a lot of points to be put up in this game and a lot of opportunity for Andrew Luck. If you want to go further down the list, if you want to spend a little less, consider guys like Derek Carr. I really like. Derek Carr is a guy who throws the ball a ton. 227 passing attempts this season. That is the 4th most in the league. If you look, he's not thrown fewer than 34 passes in any game this season. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity there. I think he's a little riskier because of basically his yardage totals. They're all over the place, right? You can see everywhere from 199 yards to 319, and they're fairly random. But even with those random totals, he's been able to score 23 or more fantasy points in 4 out of 6 games this season. I would argue that this matchup with Jacksonville is probably the best matchup he's had since week 1. There should be a lot of points scored in this game. Jacksonville is a team that gives up a lot of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Derek Carr is a guy who can score points and throw touchdowns in the fourth quarter, which not all quarterbacks have the ability to do, believe it or not. So I think you get a full 4 quarters worth of scoring opportunity from Derek Carr. He's got a lot of weapons, and they should be able to put up plenty of points this week. And then if you're really desperate, if you're really desperate for points down here or a cheap quarterback, I think Tyrod Taylor is interesting with LaShawn McCoy being ruled out for this game. Maybe they run a few more designed runs for Taylor, who is a very capable runner. You can see how many rushing attempts he gets. Not sure how much I could ever trust him. Again, he's not going to throw the ball all over the yard, most likely, but he could steal a couple, maybe a rushing touchdown or a bunch of yards somewhere. Case Keenum is probably the only other guy who's interesting. Trevor Siemian, I'm vaguely interested in. Keenum, at least, is coming off of a really good game. Again, probably not a guy you can trust, taking a look at his not only his career, but even this season. But if they found something last game where he completed 27 of 32 passes, he might be able to parlay that, continue to have a second straight week of production. So coming off an excellent week, and he's only $200 more. So if you're really desperate, I don't think those are bad plays, but I'll probably be spending up a little more on quarterback this week. All right, the running back position. So if we're paying up for quarterbacks, I think that running back is the place we can go value. Seems to be a lot of value this week. Even with that being said, I'll have plenty of exposure to guys like Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson. I don't love the matchup with Seattle, but he's probably a decent GPP play just because, he might be the best running back in the league. He's been phenomenal. DeMarco Murray, obviously going to be very chalky. So I think there's definitely plays up here with Melvin Gordon, but I think those are straightforward. Let's talk a little more interesting. And I'm going all the way down here to Terrence West. I think Terrence West is really interesting. Okay. First of all, he gets a lot of carries, 23 and 21 in 2 of the last 3 weeks. A really good yards or average run here over the last few weeks. You can see it was actually a shame against Washington. The guy ran great. 8.6 yards per carry, but he only gets the ball 11 times. Last week, 23 big carries. He punches in 2 touchdowns. I mean, you can see the fantasy points are there, and he actually gets a decrease, a price decrease. And presumably it's, on the road against the Jets, which obviously is not an ideal matchup, but $4,800 for a guy who might touch the ball 20 times. Joe Flacco popped up on the injury report this week. Who knows if he's going to play? Keep an eye on that situation. They might lean on the running back just a little bit more. So Terrence West, $4,800 and probably going to get a lot of touches. That's going to be hard to avoid. Okay, we can stay right in this price neighborhood for the next couple here. Actually, James White at $4,600 on DraftKings. Probably no one has benefited more from Tom Brady returning to the Patriots than James White. Obviously, Gronk gets it going last week. Brady helps everyone, but James White is really the guy who is now supplanting starter LeGarrette Blount in terms of playing time. James White played 39% of snaps last week. Blount only played 25%. White has actually outsnapped Blount in both of the last 2 games, which are the only 2 games that Tom Brady has played in. James White has caught 12 passes over those last 2 weeks compared to 13 catches over the first 4 games. So obviously, James White is a guy who's being heavily involved in the passing game. You can see here 9 and 6 targets. He caught 2 touchdowns last week. White is really only a play for me on sites that are full point per reception, which is what DraftKings is. Because he's not going to get a lot of carries, right? You can see he's not very much involved in the running game, but he is heavily involved in the passing game, especially under Tom Brady. So keep him in mind. He's a very cheap price for a guy who literally has multi-touchdown upside. You're talking about, last week, 8 catches, 47 yards, and 2 TDs. A very good value play for my money here. All right, and then we also have Jacquizz Rodgers here at $4,300. And if you would have told me I'd be talking about Rodgers 2 weeks ago, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy. But remember, Tampa Bay coming off a bye, so the last time that they took the field was Week 5 against Carolina. The Bucks running back situation is just absolutely depleted. Charles Sims goes on the IR. Doug Martin hurts himself late last week. He had a setback again in practice this week. He's not going to play. Jacquizz Rodgers last week was basically forced to play every single down. The guy saw 30 carries. 30 carries. And then he tacked on 5 more receptions. We're talking about 35 touches. Don't get me wrong. I don't think Rodgers is an excellent talent in any possible way. In fact, for having 35 carries, he only turned in 20 fantasy points. That's probably the lowest total you could ever put together with 35 touches in an NFL game. But running back is really a position of opportunity. It's a position of volume. And Rodgers, again, in line for that this week against San Francisco. I don't know who else is going to touch the ball for him. It seems like he's going to be forced to play almost every single down, and he's going to be heavily involved. So here's Rodgers, who's a guy at $4,300. If after the week, if we do a calculation of dollars spent per touch, Rodgers is probably going to be the cheapest guy there because he's going to touch the ball so often. All right, wide receiver, obviously some really star-studded plays here. Unfortunately, Antonio Brown with the loss of Ben Roethlisberger. If you look at Brown's splits without Big Ben, it's not pretty. I suspect the Steelers will have to throw the ball a lot this week to stay with New England, but the stats are not pretty when Big Ben doesn't play. Julio Jones, great play. Odell Beckham, great play. Amari Cooper, especially if you're going to play Derek Carr. There was what stat did I read? Cooper, I think last year he dropped something like 18% of all his catchable passes. This year he's only dropped 5% of those passes. So here's a guy who has always gotten a ton of targets and maybe hasn't converted on a lot of them, and now he is. And he's just having a killer season. I mean, 25 targets in the last 2 weeks. We talked about the matchup with Jacksonville. Cooper, just a really big primetime play. If you want to go contrarian, I actually think it's going to be AJ Green again. This guy's always underowned, but here you go. You've got him between Julio Jones. You've got him between ODB, who had an unbelievable week last week. You've got him between Amari Cooper. AJ Green goes overlooked. Okay, he is $8,600, another target monster. You can see double digits almost every single week. They're going up against the Cleveland Browns. I mean, I don't think I have to tell you that that's a good matchup and that Cleveland's probably going to give up a ton of points here. So I think that he, has just as much upside as the rest of these guys. But out of the top, maybe between Julio and Cooper, these four, I bet you Green is the lowest owned. I don't want to beat you down with chalk too much, but Mike Evans might be. I expect him to be highly owned. He should be, but guys who come off a bye are usually forgotten. So Tampa Bay didn't play last week. A lot of good options there, but I'll have Mike Evans as much as I can. All you can eat, baby. Just an absolute target monster. Again, you can see the opportunity that he gets from Jameis Winston. They placed the Bucks placed Vincent Jackson on the IR. It's the Mike Evans show. I mean, they've really got no one else at wide receiver. Expect a ton of looks. I'll be paying up for him. Then we'll scroll down the list a little more just so we can talk about some other guys. Let's see what we have. How about Cam Meredith? Bursts onto the scene with 27 targets over the last 2 weeks. Him and Brian Hoyer have a clear connection. I don't love this for the Thursday night turnaround. We've seen that fantasy points have been really volatile on Thursday nights and kind of hard to predict with the short turnaround. But Cam Meredith just having 2 really, really great weeks in a row. I don't think this is chasing points, so to speak. We're just investing in a guy whose price has not corrected completely yet. So he's still only $4,700. Again, Green Bay's a 7.5 point favorite in this game. Chicago's probably going to have to throw the ball a ton. So Brian Hoyer is likely to look his way quite a bit. Okay, the tight end position, a little bit of a cesspool right now. It's a thin position as it is. we've got a lot of injuries. We've got a lot of guys banged up. Greg Olsen on a bye, so you take, one of the best tight ends in the league out of the slate. Rob Gronkowski, obviously going to be popular again. Goes off last week. Presumably he's going to have a good week. Delaney Walker is going to be popular. I think that we can find a little bit of value here. Hunter Henry is a guy that has a sublime matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, who are just giving up, I think it's the second most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Clearly carving out a little niche for himself in this San Diego offense with Phillip Rivers. 19 targets over the course of the last 3 weeks. He's caught a touchdown in each one of those. Rivers looking his way in the red zone. That's all really good stuff. I think he will be popular again. I mean, there's really only a few tight end options that I think people are going to be passing around, but for good reason. And then keeping close eye on, where's my man here? Jack Doyle. So keep a close eye on Dwayne Allen's injury for this week. He left the Monday night game early last week with an ankle injury. Now Jack Doyle comes in, he catches a touchdown, he returns 15 fantasy points. I have concerns about Doyle. The concerns are that he doesn't get a lot of looks, he doesn't get a lot of receptions. He is very touchdown dependent, but he might be the only guy for the Colts who, with Andrew Luck, use their tight end. You can see, even without a ton of receptions, he has scored at least 12.5 fantasy points in half of his games this season. So 12.5 fantasy points again this week would be 5 times value. I actually think that he can exceed that because he might be the only game in town if Dwayne Allen does not suit up for this one. So Jack Doyle is a guy that I'll be keeping my eye on, and I'll be keeping my eye on the injury report. The case to be made for the Broncos is so significant that I'm not sure. I'll spread out exposure, but I don't even know how likely it is that I'm not all in on the Broncos. First of all, they're probably the best defense in the league. They score fantasy points in bunches. They have the best matchup that I think you could ask for with Houston. So going up against Brock Osweiler, who they have an intimate knowledge of considering he was a Bronco. They're at home coming off a loss on Thursday night. So they've had extra time to prepare for this game. They've had extra time to just be well rested and ready to go. Brock Osweiler in that game against the Colts last week looked terrible for 95% of it. I noticed that when he was missing his passes, he kept missing them high, which is a recipe for interceptions, whether it's tipped balls or overthrown receivers, and safeties make interceptions. So this is just a really, really bad spot for Osweiler, who's already, I think he's second in the league in interceptions behind only Ryan Fitzpatrick, who just got benched. So Brock Osweiler in a really, really bad spot against this Broncos D. If you've made it this far, I'll show you just a few other quick things here, some of the tools that I've been using. This is my chart for points allowed by position. So just a really cool visual week by week on what defenses are allowing. So this says that opposing quarterbacks against the Lions are averaging 26 fantasy points a game. So obviously these are the teams that you want to be targeting. Just to point a couple of really interesting ones out that you may not have noticed. Here's tight ends on DraftKings. So here's the Browns allowing 26 fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Yes, obviously that's inflated by a couple of huge games, but they've been really, really bad. Tyler Eifert would be the target this week. Now he's been battling injuries, so make sure he's going to suit up, and if you're willing to take on the risk, he might be an interesting play. And then defenses. So like if you wanted to take on, defenses against the Jets, against Tampa Bay, against Carolina, these are all teams that are giving up a lot of points to opposing defenses. It's no surprise that, they're also committing a lot of turnovers. So that's the reason behind it. But I thought it was something that was cool just to allow you to check out visually. This is on my website, dfsondemand.com. It is a pro tool, but it's a pretty sweet one that I like along with all the other stuff. So if you're interested, check it out. And that is basically it for me. Best of luck this week. If you have any questions, either hit me up on Twitter. It's at DFS On Demand, or shoot a comment down below. All right. Good luck. See ya.